Welcome to Composers the Podcast. This is Juwon Lim. With me today is Jonathan Harris, who is also a recent graduate of Purchase, now going to Columbia to pursue his master's degree in composition. Jonathan is a composer and sound installation artist who is interested in creating immersive environments that embrace sound through objects, field recordings, musicians, and etc. In this episode, Jonathan talks about his recent projects, his process in creating a new work, and about finding a voice as a composer.
It's better now. Seems like it's working.
It is.
Yeah.
Great. Let's pick it up from where we left off. Yeah, so Jonathan, how's your life been after Purchase?
Like so many others, the pandemic has really shaped the last, 12 months of our lives. So I started a new program at Columbia University and it was actually a big transition for me because I was switching out of working directly in the composition track and working more now interdisciplinarily between visual arts and sculpture and working with sound and composition. So it's a big transition because the whole kind of programmatic structure is very changed. From typical kind of music school sort of teacher-student lessons kind of a paradigm, but it's been just an absolutely incredible experience. I have been studying with Mia Masaoka and Seth Cluett, and Georg Haas and David Adamczyk and all of these incredible luminary individuals. And it's been just a really big change. But the biggest change of all is that there's been this giant shift from being in person and thinking about most of my work, as I'm sure we'll talk about later, deals. I think about space a lot and our experience of listening to work in a very site-specific way. And also, I tend to work with like weird acoustic phenomena, and high pitches and all kinds of weird stuff that the Zoom algorithm just completely crunches down. And it's like a very weird way to present your music to your colleagues and to faculty. So it's been a really interesting and challenging year, but that's more or less what the last 12 months has been like for me.
Is there any recent project that you are working on?
Yeah, a number of different projects. I think sort of the main project that I'm focused on right at the moment, there's actually two projects that I'm focused on right at the moment. One is a sculptural work, and I'll sort of spare your audience a lengthy discussion about the work itself. It's more or less like a personal cartography, and I'm thinking about I sort of have erected this giant log structure that is sort of half a forest and half a nest and half a cocoon, and it's really sort of a wild piece. And I'm integrating that sonically with I don't know if you know what phosphenes are, but when you rub your eyes and there's all those weird image patterns.
Oh, yeah.
It's a piece that's somewhat inspired by those patterns. I was looking a lot at the work of Irv Wilson and beginning to experiment with different intonation structures. I've been looking at Irv Wilson's work from before I even know you, Juwon, but really kind of dove in this one piece, and I've been thinking a lot of intonation structures and sort of these kind of weird moire patterns that our eyes see when our hands are closed. So it's not really a sort of a soundtrack to the sculpture, but maybe sort of like a competing element in a way. And there's lots of different interactions between overtones. And I sort of the initial idea for this piece was, I was thinking a lot about prey animals like rabbits and marmots. My partner and I live up in the Catskills, and we see these critters on our lawn all the time. And I was thinking about enhanced perceptual acuity that these animals have. Like they are constantly, all of their listening apparatus is jacked up to 11 because it helps them to survive and detect predators and all of these other things. And I was thinking about how that's like really great to have this enhanced perceptual acuity, but it also probably leads to a life of like perpetual anxiety if you're constantly like tweaked out and afraid of the whatever is going to try to eat you. So I started to think about this idea of how we use sound as a means of, even our own human auditory apparatus is designed in such a way that it helps us to detect danger and predators and locate us in space. And so I was using these very high frequency sounds and sort of bouncing these transients off of the corner. This log structure that I was talking about, the sculpture, is going to be in a corner. And so I'm using transducers to activate the logs, and also little tiny speakers that aim these high frequencies sort of at the back corner of the room. It sort of really spatializes in the space in such a way that as you stand in front of the sculpture, you don't really know where the sound is coming from. So I was playing with these ideas of scale shifts and ways to kind of confuse the person who's viewing the work, and sort of really play with these bad location cues. And then I started to experiment a little bit with autoacoustic emissions, who Marianne Amichet is very famous for working with these, Alvin Lucier and many others. And I sort of found different intervallic relationships that happen to elicit this effect in my ear. I think you know what these are, Juwon, but this is where, like, when there's these distortion products that your ear creates, and your biology also acts as an amplifier of sound. And so I have all of these sort of different spatial effects that are going on in the room, and also there are little popping sounds that happen in your ears when you stand in front of the sculpture. So that's sort of like a big thing that I've been working on. But the other major piece is this installation that's going up at SUNY Purchase, which is I won the President's Award for Public Art right at the end of last year.
I heard about that one.
Yeah. So that's been a lot of fun. I had been unfortunately not able to work on it on campus. I did a little bit last summer, but it's again, the idea here with this piece is that I'm using sight to. I'm thinking a lot about acoustic phenomena, and I actually really am inspired by all of the things that people who are designing, like studio engineers and producers, like, try to arrange their work studios, their recording studios, in such a way that it like limits any kind of weird acoustic byproduct and artifact. And I learned all of those the tricks to cancel them, but I go right the other way with them. I actually try to exploit a lot of weird things that are happening. So as you know, Juwon, the long arcades, the walkways, like from the music building to the hub, and on the other side from the art building to Campus Center, there are these giant triangulated arcades. And so I'm going to have 8 speakers in each one of those. So a 16 channel piece altogether. And basically what it does is, it was really inspired by American earthworks, both contemporary and ancient. Basically, it's going to just follow the sun. It tracks the azimuth and the altitude of the sun, using astronomical data to do this. And basically it just acts sort of as there's a spectral filter. As the sun passes over these arcades, there will be this sound that just kind of hovers and bounces around this triangular space. So it's a drone, more or less in the style of something that you would hear from Phil Niblock or Georg Haas, or, I'm working a lot with a harmonic series. I say harmonic series, it's not like a very basic read of the harmonic series. I actually have sort of 2 adjacent series happening simultaneously, working off of different fundamentals. I was inspired a little bit by Renaissance treatment of the sun, and in those old paintings they use like gold leaf. So I was really struggling with how to deal with the compositional aspects of this piece. And I was like trying all these different ways to make interesting sounds. And then I was thinking about this gold leaf, and I randomly was like looking at the gold structure, like the electron structure of gold. And then like there are all these numbers, the number sort of that are part of the electron structure, like ended up becoming part of the numerology of the different partials that I'm using in the piece. And from there, the piece sort of developed. But yeah, those are sort of the two major things I'm working on. But I have to say, most of the compositional aspects of those pieces are kind of sort of done. And now I'm just working on the like brute labor of, building speakers and building sculpture and dealing with all of the sort of similar to, hammering out the score itself, getting the parts ready.
Yeah, so you made the transition from, not the transition is maybe not the right word. So you were, what you're doing now is different from what the traditional composer might do, but it's still the sculpture.
So I've been thinking a little bit about like, I do think of myself as a composer. What began to happen in my time at Purchase was there was a sax piece that I did for the main concert hall, and I haven't talked about this piece a lot, but I wrote this for the great saxophonist Charlie Arbelais, and who was a colleague of mine. This was before your time at Purchase, and that space in the sort of the recital hall or whatever. I think there used to be some extra. There was maybe an organ in the space, or there was some extra treatment in there. And I don't know if you've recognized this, but the space has this, like the echo, the rate of reverberation time is really vast. Like the upper notes more or less have a normal recital hall decay, but all of the lower frequencies just like roll on and on forever. And so I wrote this piece that basically exploited the like very, I wouldn't say that, I actually really love the acoustics in that room, but I think it's sort of bad acoustics, and so I wrote specifically for that space. And as that was sort of one of the first pieces that I did for Purchase. And from there, worked with like different ranges of either musicians or electronics. But what began happening is that I very specifically started writing for the spaces that where I knew the performance was going to be. One of the reasons I started working with electronics was because I could really sort of fine tune the pitch structures. There was a piece that I did, for example, where I sort of measured the dimensions of the room that I was going to be having this piece in. This was in the perception lab over in the art building, and sort of measured all of the different angles of the room. And then I just basically fit the wavelengths of given frequencies into that space. And what happens is this kind of moire effect where there are sort of high pressure zones and low pressure zones and of sound. So you have sort of wave interference. There's like you walk through the space and you would have these really loud spots and dead spots, and then loud spots and dead spots. And this is a pretty well-known acoustic phenomena. This is one of these things that recording engineers really try to kill in their studio space. But what I did was I sort of measured it so that in these dead spots of different wavelengths, you would get a loud spot of a different wavelength. So as you kind of walk through the space, there would be this kind of kaleidoscopic effect. So there's not really any like change. There's no motion happening with the different sine tones. It's just as a visitor moves through the space, there's these different kind of sort of a kaleidoscopic effect. And so from there, I began doing a lot of electronic pieces just because I could be very specific about the kinds of frequencies that I was using. And I then, part of the reason for this transition to working more with working more with objects and working more with in a sculptural medium is that I like electronics just fine. I mean, there's many electronic artists whose work I totally admire, but because of my training in the compositional world, and my training as a bassist, I mean, I really love acoustic sounds coming from objects, coming from vibrating objects in space, resonance, and so. Part of what I'm doing now is making the shift so that I can be kind of building. It's sort of like instrument building in a way, just that they are not necessarily going to be performed. Some of these objects will not be performed by musicians. I'll, of course, always be working with musicians, but these objects that I'm designing will hopefully create these kinds of experiences in space using acoustic sound. So. Yeah. Anyway, that's more or less a transition. I will always be writing for musicians as well. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So cool that you're like, you know exactly like what your style is just, it's just yours and so unique.
Yeah. Well, I know that pain, and also I want to say that like. There are many people that are working in the area that I'm working in. I am honored that you say that it's unique, but I think that there are, there's a long line of American experimental composers who are thinking about space and sound in a very and objects and resonance and acoustics. So I don't know that I've sort of broken through into something absolutely and totally original. Hopefully, maybe, but I will say, to the point of like sort of finding your voice, that yeah, it's like it's really hard. It's really a terrible process, because I was thinking a lot about like the process of composing, and sort of like I have all these pieces where I have ideas, and I really want to execute like a very specific kind of sound, and I will put all these constraints on my process and just hit my head against the wall basically for months. And these pieces that come out of that style of writing, where like I'm trying to go in, like maybe I'll find something that's interesting in there that I eventually will just give up, and then like that becomes the piece or whatever. But that process, I think, is very difficult process, and I don't think it's sort of the right way. I'm not sure that it's the right way to work. I would say that every 10 or so pieces, it's really effortless. Suddenly something clicks. There's just an idea. It's right. I happen to be working on something today instead of some homework that I should be doing. This kind of like weird piece using different stones. Yeah, it just like completely flowed out. And all of my favorite works that I've done have happened in this way, that there are like, I don't want to say effortless, because nothing is effortless, but they just kind of flow, and they come together in like a week or a half a week. And of course, there's the slog of dealing with scoring and all of the other craziness that goes into writing. But the actual process of the compositional process actually really just flows. But that only happens every 10 pieces. So I think that obviously the other 9 pieces like contribute, like all of the times that I'm beating my head against the wall, like contribute to that one piece where there is flow. And so the only thing that I can recommend in terms of like finding your voice or whatever is just like to try to reduce the target. You know what I mean? Like I think these pieces where I try to like make something that's going to be perfect, or I get inspired by some composer, I'm like, oh, I want to write a piece in that style, and I try to force myself into that. It's like the hardest way to do it. And I think really the thing that one needs to do is just write every week. I mean, if you can do a kind of a nothing piece every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or even every week, certainly once a month, just just like let it flow and don't let it be like the big deal piece, then every 4 or 5 pieces you'll realize like, oh, even though I was kind of doing the same thing for 4 pieces, like now I found this new little thing that I love to operate. And it's the aggregation of those little gestures over time that becomes your voice. Or that's the way it worked for me, is like these little tiny things that are like, now, oh, that's a Jonathan piece. Like it sounds like those little things that I do, but that comes out of like, I don't know, you just, constantly writing and working. I think that that's just the only way to do it. If you wait and then you're like, oh, the deadline's coming, I'm now going to write my big opus. It's terrible. It's just the worst process. I hate it so much. It's like just a mountain of stress and anxiety. And it's not the right way to work.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks again for joining this conversation, Jonathan. Appreciate it so much.
Yeah, cool. This was really fun. I'm so honored to be asked to do this. And so thank you and good luck.
Thanks for listening to Composers, the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the episode.